Hi, Gutsy Women. It's Dr. Brenda, Money Coach, and today we are here with Gretchen Bedell. We have yet another Gutsy Woman profile. Gretchen is the owner of two businesses who calls herself a kick-ass gal. And if I even introduce you further, Gretchen is my graphic designer, my photographer, so we've known each other for years. So there's a little disclaimer. So welcome, Gretchen, to the Gutsy Women Club, and I'm so glad you could be here with us.
Thanks for having me. Oh my gosh, your cats are cracking me up. I'm so glad it's you and not me. I've got like two dogs in here. It's the zoo. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really fun. I really like what you're doing. I really like what you're trying to start. And it's so fun to have known you and watch you go through this journey where you're like, well, I don't like my house anymore. I'm just gonna get rid of it. I'm gonna go on the road and be all adventurous all on my own.
Well, it has been interesting. So, but let's talk about you. Okay, so
Sure.
how did you get to where you are now? I mean, you've got a couple of businesses, but tell us, give us a little bit of, how you got to where you are.
Sure. So, well, part of the journey has to be with why I'm here in Williamsburg. I have a degree in theater arts management, which seemed like a thoughtful, thought out plan. Like I was going to go into theater, but I was going to be one of those few people that could like make a living wage. And clearly I hadn't done my research back in the 90s because even then, even the people in management weren't making a living wage. And I love the theater, but I came down here because I got offered a job at the Music Theater Williamsburg, which has since unfortunately closed its doors. And yeah, it was the hardest thing about doing, I loved the theater, and now I'm learning to love the theater again. But the hardest thing about doing something for money that you really love is that it starts to take the things that you love away from it. When you work in theater and you really love theater, you can't go see more shows. You're running your shows, so you can't leave to go see what everybody else is doing. So and you keep weird hours, you turn into a bit of a zombie. So when that job went away, I decided that I was not going to work somewhere that would spontaneously close its doors ever again. So I went to work at William and Mary, considering it's a very old school and it's burned down like 3 times and it's still there. It felt like a really safe bet. And while I was there, I was there for 7 years and I loved my job there. And I was really good at it, but I had started taking photos on the weekends and in the evenings with a dear friend of mine, and started getting more and more of these like funny little jobs like, oh, could you just come take our pictures, or oh, could you design this for us? And I started designing more and more while I was at the law school, and I found myself in this moment where my day job was getting in the way of my side hustle. And so I would be working and I loved my job, but I was like, wow, I could make so much more money doing this other thing if I wasn't here. So I found a convenient moment to kind of break from the law school and launch my business, Odd Moxie. And since then, so let's see, I technically started it about 2 years before my youngest was born, and he's now 8, right? Yeah, I've been saying 7, but I'm in denial. And so, yeah, it's been about 10 years and it's been really awesome. I started working out of the house, which is how people do. And if you're going to start a company, I am a very risk-averse person. So I liked starting something when I knew I still had a regular paycheck and health insurance. That made me feel very safe. Now that I've been running my own company, I don't feel like necessarily having a job is that safe anymore. You really could diversify your income streams, because at any minute you could get furloughed or laid off, or there's a global pandemic. So
Right.
anyway, so yeah, I was working out of the house and I found myself not being as respected as an owner or for my knowledge or my expertise, partially because of my gender, and partially because I worked out of my house. And there was a lot of this like, oh, good for you, pat, 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 your husband lets you have a hobby. You don't make much money when you punch people in the face. So I started my second business with my business partner, Jen, and it's a co-working space, and it's here in Williamsburg. And that was interesting because, at the time when we started it, Williamsburg didn't really know what co-working was. It was something that was pretty popular or starting to become more popular in urban environments, but we didn't really have an urban population. So people thought it was an interesting mix for Williamsburg, but I couldn't work out of my house anymore. So that worked out well for us. And now on year 7, and we moved buildings half through and went from 1,600 square feet to a little bit more than 3,200 square feet. We quadrupled the number of private offices and space. And even during the pandemic, like, we have new people signing up because nobody wants to work in their house either. And we have it's flourishing. It's fun.
That is really cool. So it's interesting because, with the pandemic, I think a lot of people who thought their regular jobs were secure are now like, I've been laid off, or I've been in the restaurant business and I've got a thing. And I wonder if that, sometimes it feels like you have more control. It is a little bit risky to sort of start your own business. I mean, what have you seen things shift over time?
For me, I think the shift is more of an internal dialogue. If I lose a single client, my business continues on and I will continue to make money. Whereas if you're working for somebody and you lose your single client, you've lost your single client. And I can't imagine trying to look for a full-time job in the middle of this. I mean, there's something like 17 people for every single job that's here, at least in my area. And we're considered one of the ones that have lots of jobs available. So
right.
I think diversifying, if you can do it without, making life crazy and going insane because you're working 800 million hours a week, I think diversifying your income streams is a really good plan.
So when you started, you didn't have any capital. So you started on really not much.
I started with, I had a computer and I had a camera and I invested in the software, and that's how I started. The fortunate thing was before I started my job, I spent a lot of time because I was interested in graphic design and interested in photography. And I spent a lot of time doing the research and learning. And I really sort of put myself through digital design school, which is great, because if you had talked to me 12 years ago, I would have been like, I know nothing about typefaces and fonts. And now I'm like, ooh, can we geek out? This is so much fun. Let me talk to you about how we can create.
Yes. Having personal experience of watching you struggle over a G. That's just not the right. I don't like the curve on that one. That one is too curly. That one is. So it's you have certainly taught. I mean, you've taught me that there's so much more to fonts and all of this stuff than I ever imagined. Different colors and different messages. So it's been interesting for sure. How did you come up with Oddmoxie? ODDMOXIE for folks who are wondering.
So I really wish this was a crazy. The URL was available. It wasn't. I wanted something that represented who I was, and so I just went to GoDaddy and started typing random words that I liked in, and that was available. In fact, I remember I messaged my friend who's a writer, and I said, "Is Moxie MOXIE or MOXY?" I didn't even know how to spell Moxie, so there's not a great story. Work Nimbly, it took a little bit more time to come up with the name for that one, and it was a bit more recent. On Moxie, it was just like, hey, the name's there.
Well,
It's available.
it's memorable. I certainly remember it. So if that's key. Um, so did you grow up like always thinking you would be doing something different, whether it was theater or yeah? I mean, you're very creative. So did you, when you were younger, were these expectations placed on you, or did everybody was like, oh, that's Gretchen, she's just gonna go her own way anyway? I mean, tell us, what was that like?
Yeah, so I think my parents were pretty traditional. They, traditionally they even divorced, and my mom went back to work and sort of started her career when she was, in her late 30s, and she started at Kelly Services as a receptionist. And when she retired, she was, C-suite. She was a VP. C-suite adjacent. So she did it, and even at the time, like, it was pretty hard for a woman to raise 3 kids and, have. I remember she didn't even get credit cards because they didn't want to give her a credit card. So, things like that. So there was that. But particularly once I got into high school, I always had a very unique set of friends, and we did things that nobody else did. And I think that really sort of set the stage for me in the future. Like, when I was in high school, a friend of mine wrote a play. We invited classes. Not our teacher didn't invite classes. We invited the teachers in the classes to the play, and everybody thought it was a school-sanctioned event. And it was a story about 2 women who happen to be lesbians, one of whom is dying from HIV from intravenous needle use. And this was in 1993.
Wow.
So we almost got suspended for the best they could come up with was threat to riot, because the entire school showed up at this play. I have a friend who rescued a Volkswagen, and he and a buddy of ours rebuilt it in front of our house when we started college to take it across country. I don't know, we were always building things and making things. We made literary journals and magazines. We did scavenger hunts. We never hung out and just played video games or watched TV. We were always making and doing and building. And I think the most mellow thing we did was hang out on my front porch after we had built something or made something. So yeah.
So you were pushing the envelope way back then.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And that was, to be fair, part of the nature of where I grew up. Like, I grew up, now, while we weren't super rich, I grew up around a lot of wealth. So I think that afforded us a lot of advantages that we wouldn't have had otherwise. But yeah, it was fun.
So I'm gonna back up just a bit, because the younger people are probably like, "What do you mean your mother couldn't get a credit card?" So for younger folks out there, women, single, divorced women could not get their own credit card. They had to have their husband sign off on it. Okay, so that wasn't that long ago. So I'm just catching people up to the way it used to be. You could not open up your own bank account either. You couldn't have your own funds. So it was very different times. What do you think is the gutsiest thing you ever did?
The gutsiest thing I ever did? Oh,
Tell
Lord.
us. Is it legal?
I mean, especially, it's one of those, this is like, well, the gutsiest thing I ever did that you and you survived. I used to travel so much when I was in high school. Like, I really, retrospectively, it didn't occur to me that was gutsy at the time. But I, started taking Greyhound buses when I was 13 years old, and I would go across state lines with my sisters. And, this is, again, parents, and, maybe I would question their parenting choices here, but we all survived. It was nothing shady ever happened. We never got almost kidnapped or had to deal with somebody doing something gross or something. But yeah, we would get on the Greyhound either in Ohio or Pennsylvania, parent we were going to, and we'd travel across country, between, well, not cross country, but between Pennsylvania and Ohio, a 15-hour Greyhound trip. I think that then later allowed me to sort of really, even before I had a car or access to a driver's license, we would take the train. I would take the train up to New York City regularly in high school. We'd take the train into Philadelphia. So it really like made the world very accessible and very non-threatening because, you know, it's something that I've always done. Yeah. So, but my most recent gutsy thing was I cut my own dang hair. I feel like that was pretty gutsy.
Well, having not tried that myself, I would agree. But I mean, from a young age too, I think that when you travel, it just sort of, and you're doing it as you know, maybe with your sisters, but there aren't adults and there aren't other men guiding you. So I mean, I know that you're married and you've got two boys, and you're still.
Yeah.
I mean that, but you are. So tell me what's going on with the cycling because I know that you got very involved with the
My,
local cycling federation or whatever it's called group.
sure. So, if you want something done, hand it to somebody who's busy. Uh, I coached by Alan, who is well known in our area for being an advocate for cycling, and he's a pretty cool dude. And he invited my husband and I to a board meeting, and the next thing we knew, we were regularly attending the board meetings. And then, like 6 months later, they were like, "Okay, we need a new president." And I didn't go, "Not it," fast enough. You know, not it, no, not me. So it's Bike Walk Williamsburg, and the thing that's really cool is we're an advocacy group, so we advocate for better pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. And I love this because it's one of those like legislative issues that kind of touches on a lot of things that people wouldn't necessarily expect. Cycling, for the most part, tends to be a thing of privilege and not necessarily a thing of transportation in certain communities. And when you live in a community that's got a very diverse income level, cycling can be very much about transport. And there are very not safe places to ride where you still need to be able to get to work. And there's a big stigma around riding your bike as transportation versus riding your bike as a leisure activity. It touches on gender roles. There's a lot of places where my husband is perfectly fine riding his bike, and I absolutely would not consider riding mine. So we do a lot of things. We do bike rodeos. Well, prior to the pandemic, we did bike rodeos. We ran clubs in the elementary schools where we helped teach children how to ride bikes. And for a lot of them, in some of their neighborhoods, they don't have safe places to ride. So this is a really great opportunity. We bring the bikes, we fit the bikes, we get helmets for them. They each get their own helmet with their name on it, and we fit the helmet to them and teach them, like, this is how you check your bike to make sure your brakes still work. This is how you check to make sure your tires are, inflated, and, things like quick stops and use. And so we teach them those skills so that if they're out riding around their neighborhoods, they have a chance to be safer. We go to a lot of events where we literally just hand out helmets to anybody who wants to stop long enough for us to fit it to their head to try to make sure everybody's wearing a helmet.
Yeah. It's really interesting perspective because, living in the suburbs, I have lived in central cities, downtown Brooklyn, downtown Atlanta, and none of those you can ride bike in. I couldn't then, and you're right. I mean, and it would make a whole lot more sense and ease all of the car congestion, but people just don't do it, or it's not accessible. And so, yeah, that's something I didn't really think about very much. So I'm glad that you're doing that.
Yeah, so it touches on economic disparity. It touches on environmentalism. It touches on economic development. So if your neighborhoods are more walkable or they're more accessible to certain things, your property values go up. So putting in sidewalks and proper infrastructure not just helps for the people who don't necessarily have access, but it helps the existing houses and the businesses. So it's neat.
Yeah,
but
so
it also initially.
as part of this role, you've gone up to DC and lobbied?
Yeah, yeah,
What
that was.
what what was that like?
I wish I had a. You'll have to share the picture. I have a picture of me in the Congress building in an office chair where my husband had pushed me, and I'm doing these. I was like, hey, if you're here, you got to enjoy the rides. It's a long day. I don't know if anybody's done that. It has one of those machines, like when you say you've done it, that like, ooh, that's like a sexy thing. But really, it's a long day. You spend a lot of time rushing in between different offices, talking to different people, trying to make sure that your 5 minutes that you have with someone, whether it's an aide or if you're lucky enough, the congressman or the senator, like, so, you really have to kind of have your message honed in. And the people I went with were super pros, and one of them was like clearly had spent a lot of time networking in our area with these guys. So he'd be like, "Oh yeah, so how was your golf game last Thursday?" So, which was not me. I just took it along and was like, "Here's the paperwork that he just mentioned, and yes, let me email you that. I will write it down." But it was cool. It was a 3-day event with the League of American Bicyclists. And most people don't know that the League of American Bicyclists is why we have modern road infrastructure. Like, they started the roads so that they could ride their bicycles on it, not cars.
No, I did not know that. I did not know that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's so I want to kind of ask you about. I mean, so you've clearly stepped out on your own. You've done things. I am sure. So I mean, you wrote something, and it really caught my eye that you have reimagined life a few times, and each time I committed myself with grace when I found it wasn't the path for me. So I mean, that's that. I really love the way that you said that. So you're like forgiving of yourself. Of like, I mean, what does that mean to you?
So, once upon a time, I was going to be a great actress, and it turned out I was a terrible actress. Instead, I was going to do theater management. But when I was going to be an actress, I 100% threw myself into that. I committed to it. And got good enough to realize how truly awful I was. I saved the world from another really terrible actress. Oh, I'm so bad. It's so bad. It's painful bad. Like, it's worse because if I wasn't so good, I could have just continued on in ignorance. But instead, it was like, oh, there's no help for me. This is awful. And when I did theater management, I like threw myself into it, and I committed. And when I found that it wasn't right for me, then I was like, okay, at least I tried this. And that's the thing, is that when people decide to try something in their life, there's this like finality. And, particularly, I'm in my 40s. This is like the next season. I've got kids who are starting to age a little bit. And in my 40s, I'm going to see my kids age out of my home. And so what might have been really right for me when I was in my 20s, or what might have been really right when I was in my 30s, it might not be right now. So sort of accepting that, like, I can try things and I can do things and I will throw myself into them. And when they're no longer serving me, to say that, like, this isn't about, like, this is the thing I did. This isn't who I am, I guess.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
So this morning I was out kayaking, and I'm in Florida, and I tell you, alligators scare the hell out of me, and I had second thoughts about should I go on a kayak when there are alligators around, and I'm like, well, other people do it. Other people haven't been eaten by them too much, so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this, but it's about stepping outside of my comfort zone, and I know that with many of the women that I've spoken to, I mean, you have to be willing to do that. I mean, as a photographer, I know you've pushed me way outside my comfort zone. But can you talk about like where have you had like your borders, your boundaries, and then how have you broken through into the doing some of those scary things?
So this is probably where like I'm like the least gutsy person. There are things that I know I will never do. Like I'm never going to jump out of a plane. That doesn't hold any value for me. But I'm not scared of failing, and I'm not scared of being necessarily seen as someone who tried something and didn't succeed the first time. So I think where a lot of people have really that like pushing of the boundaries, it comes from fear. Fear is good. Fear gets you not eaten by alligators, or jumping out of planes for no good reason. Like fear exists for a very, very good reason. It is a good thing. But my personal like places where I really struggle, like the places where I'm constantly challenging my boundaries are I'm an aggressively shy person, believe it or not. Like painfully shy person. And I know there's a lot of talk now about introverts versus extroverts, and I'm really science-based, and I don't believe that the behavioral psychology people are super in on that right yet. But I do get written out very quickly by crowds, mostly because I have to keep reminding myself not to panic. I'm worried about not so much seen as being making mistakes, but I worry about being seen as a fool. And I think my big obstacle is really worrying too much about other people's opinions about me. And I know that a lot of people struggle with that. And if we could all just let that go, we'd be so much happier. But I don't have any secrets on letting that go.
Well, I think the secret is when you hit 50, okay?
Right?
It's like, whoa, I don't give a crap about anything else. But I mean, have you noticed that as you age, that how things may have changed? I don't think you'd probably put your kids on a bus by themselves anymore, but you might. But it's just for you. Are you getting more comfortable in your own skin, and it's okay to there goes Dolly.
Hey, Dolly. Yeah. I think, this year we went to, every year we go to the beach with my in-laws, and it's a fantastic time. And this year, because of COVID, like everybody else, my new favorite hobby is eating too much. So it's such a fun hobby. I highly recommend it. The unfortunate side effects are none of your clothes fit anymore. And so, normally I'd go to the beach and I'd be so worried about what I looked like, and I'd really be uncomfortable. And this year I was like, forget it. If I have to buy a bathing suit that like my husband could also jump in because it's so long, fine. And I'm not going to worry about whether or not I'm in a picture. I'm just not, because someday, I think the big thing was when my grandmother passed away, like I loved my grandma and we were very close, but she went through Alzheimer's and did the long, slow walk. But when she passed away, I don't even before she started walking away, none of her thoughts were like, oh God, I wish this picture of me didn't exist. Oh God, I wish I'd gone and, I hadn't gone to the beach with my family because I didn't look good. And I think that the older I get, the less I'm wrapped up in my value being my aesthetics. Does that scan? Unless I'm worried about people thinking I'm pretty.
No, it's
But
yeah. I do think that is. I'm hoping that that's part of the process, and like for me, I'm like, okay, well, that's going to be the before picture, so it's okay.
yeah, there you go. Well,
Because for women, we're always. Our hair is changing, our bodies are changing. There's the amount of really great time we get, where that picture is just perfect, is like shrinks.
I had 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks where like everything was, and I late in life, like really in the last couple of years, took up weightlifting with a personal trainer. And right before COVID started, I was really pretty dedicated to going to the gym because I found it fun. For somebody who wasn't like, I don't think of myself as inherently athletic. I didn't do team sports. I I didn't do any of that. I found myself really, really feeling very confident about like, look at this stupid heavy thing I can pick up for no reason other than like, look, I can pick it up. Oh my gosh. Or, I go, and where I work out, there are a lot of, like pretty dedicated gym goer guys who are all like, oh, and when you go and you do your little workout and then they go and they sit down and they go to do what you just did and they have to move the pin lighter. Like yeah. So I think as I've aged, I found more things to be happy about and to be confident about that weren't things I thought I'd be confident about before.
Yeah. What advice do you have for women who are watching who, they want to move forward towards some type of a dream, but they're just scared to, or they feel trapped that they can't? I mean, what kind of advice do you have? Now we have a new cat in the back, so Ginger.
So I think my honest advice would be, have your really big dream and take a look at it and now cut it down into pieces until you have the smallest piece that you find not scary and not overwhelming, and do that. Anytime you're going for a major dream, anytime you're trying to do something that you believe is spectacularly big and hard, it's probably spectacularly big and hard, but there is something that you can do that'll push you towards that in a way that still makes you feel safe and comfortable. And, every step you take towards that dream is a step that you've taken towards that dream. So I think that's it. Break it down until you can find the first thing that doesn't terrify you.
And
or that with your life, like right now, if I wanted to go, to New York City to have my theater friends, like this seems like a really bad moment to do that. But I can plan a trip. I can reach out to them.
Right.
I can, like there's a smaller, less threatening, more achievable step.
So what's in store for you? What are your dreams for years, let's say?
Well, my husband a couple of years ago answered a job ad for a job in Baltimore. And weirdly got offered the job. And it was with a government agency and he needed security clearance. But I don't want to leave my house. I am smitten with my home. It chewed edges and all. It's my home. I love where we live. I love our community. I love the schools that the kids go to. I love the opportunities that we have. I love how approachable everything is. But I love being in cities. I love being in an urban environment. So we started really thinking about what it would be like if we had both what we call a city house and a country house. Unfortunately, COVID ate the job. So he has been in process to get the clearance, and we were really pretty close to planning for it when COVID struck. Now all of our plans are gone. I mean, we were apartment hunting. So, but it happens. Like that's a setback, but it's not the end of the world. That doesn't mean, right now he's applying for other jobs in similar industries in other cities. So maybe we end up in DC, which we both really love. Maybe we end up, in Richmond, which we both really love. But the goal is to, in the next 10 years, because my kids, again, are aging out of the house in 10 years, so we'll be empty nesters, is to sort of have this house lifestyle where, we have our suburban home where we and have too many animals and can ride our bikes to the grocery store. And then we go to an urban environment where I can go see, performances, and we can walk to the bar and then walk home. And we don't have to worry about parking our cars or driving anything anywhere. So that's the big goal.
That sounds really, really neat. If people want to learn more about you, what website should they go to?
Yeah. So my company website, which is, it's got a little bit of me in there, is oddmoxie.com. So
Mhm.
ODDMOXIE. My co-working space is Work Nimbly, WORKNIMBLY. And we have a small business support group, which actually might be, because we're doing Zoom, might be good for your ladies. Brenda is a cobbler. It's called the Cobblers Collective. And it's a group of people who own businesses in a space where we can be vulnerable to those businesses, which is an unusual. Most mastermind groups are more about hard charging and super productivity. And ours is about like, guys, I think I screwed something up. Help me.
Yeah, it has been very helpful as somebody brand new to the whole business thing. And what am I doing? What am I getting into? And I could cry if I do, and just like. So it's a Cobbler's Collective is a great place, and I will have all of those links in the bottom part. So, Gretchen, this has been absolutely a delight. It was so good to touch base with you again. And for everybody there in the Gutsy Women Club, this ends yet another Gutsy Woman profile, and we'll touch base with you again next Wednesday. Take care.